Welcome to the All Things DER podcast, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, we dig in, define, and discuss where the new energy economy is heading with electric industry leaders and explore all the ways that distributed energy resources can modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome, listeners, to the All Things DER podcast. I am Dr. Elizabeth Cook, your host for today. And I am happy and excited to have Aaron Anaya, the DG Ombudsman at Orange Rockland Utilities, joining us for our conversation today. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. And tell me a little bit about yourself and what you're doing and, your utility that you're within.
Thanks, Elizabeth. My name's Aaron Anaya. I'm with O&R. I've been with O&R for about 13 years. And my current role is the Tech Engineering Section Manager and DG Ombudsman. And what we do is DER interconnection, distribution protection, and power quality for O&R, which is a utility in New York, Southern New York, Orange and Rockland counties in New York, and also in New Jersey, Northern New Jersey. So we have two states that we operate in.
So you're in the meat of all of the technical deets in regards to when all of this distributed generation comes onto the grid, you guys are preparing and ensuring the whole grid stays maintained. Very exciting place to be. And as we all know, especially our regular listeners, this is the transition. This is where it's happening at the edge.
Indeed.
So I'll just ask you, what do you foresee as really, some say challenges. I like to think opportunities in regards to this transition that we're all kind of undergoing as we start to enable clean energy solutions at the edge.
Yes, I think there's many challenges and opportunities. Some of the challenges that we have in front of us in New York and New Jersey, getting ready for 22, and in New York, that's going faster or more near term in the New York NISO wholesale market, which is getting implemented very soon. So that's a challenge, also an opportunity. New Jersey master plan is a challenge to integrate 100% carbon neutral electricity by 2050, and then New York CLCPA goals of 70% renewable energy by 2030, including 6 gigawatts of solar by 2025 and 3 gigawatts by 2030. So that's a tall order. And DER saturation, we're already starting to get saturated in some of our areas in the service territory. So the challenges are here.
Can I pick apart that a little bit when you say saturated? So do you mean like from a circuit to circuit perspective, you're starting to see some of your circuits more specifically showing up with some?
Yes. Saturation. So I would say that, we set out limitations on how much we would allow to interconnect, and we do allow backfeed, but to a certain, limitation on the substation transformer, and as well as the, circuit, how much we would allow to interconnect based on the conductor rating. But it's, it's pretty close up to the conductor rating and pretty close to the rating of the substation transformer. So once we start hitting those limits, you have to pause and look for other solutions, or start to think outside the box.
Yeah, and I think for our listeners' perspective, and something I continuously reiterate, the foundation to everything that we need to do as an industry, especially those that are the ones operating the lines and wheeling these new electrons that are going multiple directions, is having your system models and being able to have the capability to run hosting capacity analyses. So it sounds like that was definitely a foundation you guys have and you're active with. Some are not as fortunate. So it's a large lift. So kudos to you guys.
Yeah, we're fortunate. I think we have a good system set up, a good foundation, I'd say, starting with, just the GIS, our systems modeled well, and our distribution engineering study platform is integrated with the GIS, and we also have it integrated with our interconnection online access portal, which is what we process all of our DR applications through. So they're tied together, which helps and makes it a more seamless process.
Yeah, I was just at the IEEE Grid Edge Technology Conference in San Diego. And so, the big language or, message was really embracing data to build the models, to create the analytics, to drive the insight. And that's really the gap that we're filling. And I think everything that's becoming available to us is happening very rapidly because this is the technology space. So it sounds like you guys kind of had your stakes in the ground a couple of years prior to really a lot of these, what would you say? I wouldn't say aggressive is a bad word. Large, lofty goals for the New York State, but you guys seem well positioned to run those studies. So that's awesome. Thinking about everything that's being asked of New York State and then the utilities thereof, what growth are you experiencing like relative to each of the distributed energy resources, like from the magnitude and the different types that are kind of popping up in your world?
Well, ONR has about 309 electric customers, and we have about 12,000 interconnections, at this point. So that makes up about 216 megawatts of solar and interconnected with 283 megawatts of solar in the queue. And relative to ONR's service territory, our peak load was in the range of 1,200 megawatts with about 600 megawatts this time of year. So that's a pretty good amount of solar that we have interconnected already. And we also have battery storage, about 25 megawatts interconnected with 56 in the queue. So we are seeing, and it's just year over year, 1,000 more customers. So we are, just continuing with our process as it's set up today, and, looking to innovate where we can, working tuned into EPRI P174 projects, and looking at DERMS, market aggregations, which is, like I said, coming our way pretty quick, and looking at different ways to deploy energy storage to, help with hosting capacity, balancing, system reliability, of course, with best practices and what industry is asking for.
So solar is kind of your main concern. How's electric vehicle? Are you guys setting up a similar interconnection process, or is it, it's more or less seen as load? So you guys are just kind of using your typical customer interconnection process and onboarding those charging stations as needed. So it's not the same fluid as your current distribution generation connection. Are they separate?
It's a separate group that processes the EVs. That they are definitely ramping up though, and getting ready and starting to ask the questions on how we can interconnect the EVs and use those as resources as well. That's so do they get processed as an interconnection, or do they go through just an EV interconnection? I think that's an ongoing conversation that needs to be had. As late as last week, I was involved in the IEEE 1547, starting the next round of, or I should say the revision of the 1547. So vehicle to grid came up as a possible topic that needs to be expanded on for the next revision.
Most definitely, especially with all those utilities doing those electric school bus vehicle to grid pilots. They're going to become a reality. If any of us know in the industry, you kind of watch the pilots and you watch the others, and they ultimately make their way to the utility. And I think one thing, listening to really the industry and really what we're doing, it's the foundational technologies that we're putting in place is no regrets. Having the capability to have full situational awareness of your grid from the moment the interconnection comes in to the planning models to then real-time operations helps us become and be able to be that reliable, safe, and affordable utility that we are. Yes. And it only sets us up for this new reality that really we're all kind of like in flight trying to figure out. So it is definitely a conversation I think is having across all of the industry that I talk with. And I think one of the interesting topics is kind of organizational restructuring and really these new groups that are being created within the operations or really corporate strategy or, the business as itself. So, I was going to ask like your group and where you sit, how do you interact, or are you a part of like the planning, like the system planning group that are building the models and actually running those, those studies that we've been doing for 100 years? How's your group coordinate with them?
We coordinate with the planning group, but we don't stand within the planning group. We're in distribution engineering, and I think that, perhaps as, we get through and more mature with DR interconnections, the DR, we're called the technology engineering group. So we're looking at many different aspects that are maybe more real time and less forecasting, as, the planning is, typically looking more further in the future, or more like near time, dealing with the DER, today and for the interconnections. So we are separate, but we definitely have our checkpoints. Check in with our planning group, what circuit do we study? What projects do you have coming down the pipeline? And then with that, we perform our studies, and then we'll, check back in for a facility study, or, the planned upgrades that are going to be required for the DR interconnection. And then, we'll proceed with getting the interconnection through to permission to operate.
Right. I think, just one of the takeaways some of our listeners may have is this is a ever increasing obligation that is required of a utility to serve and then really enable the grid edge technologies. The grid is present today. And so as we transform to this new reality that we have yet to find, the wires and all of the interaction of the design, or I like to think like the spider web that's been weaved for 100 years, it's going to need to be reconfigured. So those that are in charge of the lines need to have that technical acumen and that insight and that capability. And so that requires a set of engineers and new resources, new perspectives, and it's really, an ever-changing group within. So it's exciting to hear about, that group really being stand up across the industry. So.
Right. And, we're going to have to be testing these on a periodic basis eventually as they get PTO. Things like modifications come through of existing sites. They want to change some piece of equipment, or they want to change their settings. And that becomes like, oh, we got to restudy these. And it's like near term, like today operations, right. It's not full on operations, but it's, more near term than I think the typical planning timeline. So we work closely with our operations groups, for if there's an outage or something, coming on a circuit, or just some switching, do we have to take the DR offline, or can they stay online? That's things that we try to work with the developers and keep them online when we can, and take them off when they need to come off.
And if you think about the vastness of those conversations can scale very quickly. So having your standards, your specifications, your agreements, your contracts all in line. I mean, those are all being lifted and pushed out because, quite frankly, we will not have enough of the utility employees to have those unique one-on-one conversations with all of this new technology at the edge. And I also think another thing, just thinking through, with you, is the idea with the utility space, you're always being asked, like, what is the value, right? And we're very risk adverse, especially with deploying new technology, right? So you have to quantify the cost benefit analysis of all of your proposed creative solutions. And that really puts you in a catch-22, because as this technology and this reality is moving faster than us standing up these processes, we have to have that ability to be flexible and to really focus on 1, 2, 10 applications. Takes just as much time as the idea of scaling. So the sooner you do the technology, the sooner you bring in the people and the processes, it is, again, that no regrets approach. And that's really for those people that don't have these very large, I don't know what's the right word for your renewable goals in New York. Being asked for the 6 gigawatts of solar by, a certain year. Some states
Right.
don't have it, but, we should all be kind of on the same roadmap. So from your group, what's a solution or an innovative solution that you're proud of, or kind of has set forth in regards to really balancing this need of the customer and really the expectations of these emerging technologies?
Yeah, some of them are maybe less technology based, I'd say, but more, thinking to the future for, saturation. One is the policy working group in New York developed cost sharing 2.0, we call it. as we started to get saturated circuits and substations, you would have, we had cost sharing in place, but it was a first mover cost that they had, the first mover ever to pay that large cost if it was a major substation upgrade. So what was proposed to the policy working group was to allow for like a pro rata share cost basis that would be paid by developers. And as they come along, you would accumulate the costs, and at some point, at some threshold, the utility would then proceed with a project that was required. So I think we hope that will allow for more DR to interconnect and get past some of those choke points. But another opportunity would be like flexible interconnections that have been piloted, and ONR has not yet piloted one, but we're always looking for opportunities where it makes sense. And what's a flexible interconnection? There could be different definitions of that, and there's different ways to implement it as well. It could be just localized at the substation where you're monitoring real-time current through the transformer, and either curtailing DER as needed to stay within the hosting capacity for voltage and thermal constraints. Or is it a DERM system that is like an all-encompassing, looking at the whole system as a SCADA system would? That's kind of where we're at. Like, where's the on-ramp for that? But the DERMS is developing, the need for DERMS. I think the use cases are coming our way. I guess that would be one thing to say there. And then smart inverter implementation in New York. We implemented smart inverter settings throughout the state as of January 1st of this year, requiring SB inverters. We have Volt VAR is going to be implemented for ONR for all of our DR interconnections, and bulk power system ride-through settings are being implemented as well. So I think those are some key points.
And I love the call out, because I think one thing about like the AEIC DR subcommittee, like our focus is really around the technical aspects. And I think the more and more this group matures, you mentioned the word policy, but like for those that big picture, something as simple as changing the way that you do a cost share, which means that you have a street on Walnut and you have the Joneses and Smiths, and the Joneses go first and they get charged a ton, and the Smiths can follow along. So the idea is just changing that policy to say, oh, how about we create a clustering process, right? So you kind of bucket a set of interconnections, knowing, because you're the one who's in charge of the meter, knowing that there will be an upgrade required if there's a certain threshold limited, and then you scale that cost across those that choose to connect. And that's a huge enablement, right? And so but getting that type of policy or that conversation moving, it almost, I feel like that conversation, we need to flip the switch, that the utilities are actively looking for ways to enable, but because it seems so complicated from a technology perspective, everyone doesn't know what they don't know. So sometimes there's a no as a response. So I love, that you use that. And then the other one you said, seems simple, but that you're going to enable smart inverter capabilities, like something that was not allowed, but now you had to do the due diligence and the work to show the effort to allow, which then again enables this new reality. So I think one thing from this talk and really many talks is, the technology is present, and other industries have, deployed, used, and can perform many models, right? It's really the who's allowed and when are they allowed and what all that outcome is, which falls really into that policy realm. So it's the people and the processes that are like the next to attack. So very interesting. So in your role, just, for the listeners, any like lessons or kind of like for those others in the utility space of like things to like think about or move forward as we all kind of transition through this great, as I say, fourth industrial revolution, as we electrify the edge?
I think collaborating with utility peers is crucial. And in New York, we have Interconnection Technical Working Group and Interconnection Policy Working Group, amongst other joint utility groups. So I feel like I work more with other utilities than I work with in my own utility sometimes. And I think there's a lot of value to be added, to be brought back, to see how, everyone's doing the same thing. Obviously, EPRI is another example. I would say that just get involved, IEEE, wherever you can, because the more, voices, more collaboration, the better the outcome. And it just, standardizes the overall implementation of what we're trying to do.
Exactly. I love it. More industry involvement is definitely something that the utility members should hear. So, well, I look forward to your involvement in AEIC DER subcommittee and
AEIC as well. Yes.
Meeting you today. So thank you for your time. And I look forward to working together on this solution making that we are endeavoring.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of All Things DER. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.